The meeting of the Economic Development Commission. Look for a motion for adoption of the agenda.
I move that we adopt the agenda from our September meeting.
Motion by Commissioner John.
Was that for the January, for today's meeting?
We're adopting the agenda
Oh,
for
I'm sorry.
today's meeting.
Just adopting the agenda.
Excuse me, the motion for January's meeting here.
For
Second.
January meeting.
Yeah.
Second by Commissioner Turner. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries. Approval of the minutes from the September meeting.
I'll move that one.
Okay. Motion by Commissioner John.
Second?
Second by Commissioner Olson. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries. Open Business Forum. We have no one to speak to at the Open Business Forum. We'll move on to the review of the draft of the 2016 work plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. As you know, each year, the Economic Development Commission is tasked with coming up with a work plan for the current year. What I'd like to do is briefly go over the highlights of last year's work plan and then present to you staff's draft work plan for your review. Last year, you had a number of items come before you that you recommended that Council or the Economic Development Authority adopt. All of those items were in fact adopted by the Council and by the Economic Development Authority. The liquor ordinance, the drinking water overlay district, the TIF 7 amendment, the JPA for the Dakota County broadband, and the land sale to Green Horizons down on Cliff and River Ridge. You may also recall back in March, we had a development panel of 3 developers who are very knowledgeable about Burnsville that made some presentations to the commission, and we engaged in some discussions with them. There is a piece of the proposed draft work plan for 2016 that will fit in with a lot of the information that we got from that panel. We also took a look at the results of Greater MSP's work for us last year. And lastly, we did do a BECREC event. Last year in May, we did a bus tour. We had 39 of our commercial brokers join us for that bus tour, and overall, we actually had 54 folks participate in the bus tour. For 2016, staff's proposed work plan is you're going to spend a lot of time working on our comp plan. Our comp plan will be coming through Planning Commission, but there are 3 parts of our comp plan that we will need review and input from the Economic Development Commission. That is taking a look at the vision of the Minnesota River Quadrant, taking a look at the vision for Heart of the City, and then taking a look at are there some things that we can do to address our aging industrial buildings in town. So you'll see that before you probably a couple of times this year. We would also propose that we continue as we have in the past to do a review of the Open to Business program and Greater MSP. And then we would also propose that we continue to have a BECREC event each year. A couple of items that have appeared on your work plan for a number of years past, staff would like to address. One of them is there is an item that has been on the work plan for about 4 or 5 years relating to commissioner involvement in primarily ribbon cuttings, open houses, things like that. As all of you are aware, that is becoming increasingly hard for commissioners to partake in due to the fact that many of our ribbon cuttings and open houses occur during the day. And obviously, for those of you who do not work in Burnsville, we're talking about a couple of hours swing to come out for a 15-minute ribbon cutting. And even for some of those that work in Burnsville, it's hard to get away from your business. We basically had 19 ribbon cuttings last year at which we had commissioner attendance at 4 of them. We did have good attendance for our BECREC tour, and we did have some commissioners attend some other things. Due to the fact that's become so hard to do and everything else, staff would be recommending that we no longer have that on your work plan, and certainly that's something that we can have your discussion on. Also, another item that's been on your work plan for 4 years now is the Open to Business Forum, which we just concluded prior to this presentation. During those 4 years, we have not had a business ever come before the Economic Development Commission during that Open to Business Forum. Again, that was originally set up so that if a business had something they would like to address to the commission that wasn't on your agenda, they would have a time to do that, very similar to citizens' comments during a council meeting. Again, over the 4 years it's been on your agenda, we have never had a business utilize that. Staff would recommend that that also be removed from the work plan and no longer be part of your agenda. Our overall recommendations that we would make to you is that you recommend that council adopt your work plan for 2016 with any additions that the commission would like to have. Again, staff is going to recommend that the piece regarding commissioner involvement and the piece regarding the Open Business Forum be no longer on the work plan. And then assuming that you do agree to keep a BEC-REC event on your work plan, we do need 2 commissioners to actually serve on the BEC-REC committee. Typically, we will have a meeting, which actually this year will be on January 29th, here at City Hall for the BEC-REC group to get together and plan whatever event we're going to do for the year. So if you agree that that's something that should stay on your work plan, we would ask that you have 2 of you agree to be on that. And with that, Mr. Chair, I would certainly stand for any questions regarding last year's work plan or staff's recommended work plan for this year.
Any discussion on any of those?
On the Open to Business Forum, how hard is it to get, if a business called you and wanted to talk about something, couldn't you just put them on the agenda for the day? Is it hard to do that?
Commissioner, typically if a business calls me about something, they're looking for an answer a little sooner than a month or so from now when the next Economic Development Commission, typically they're looking for, the questions that I typically get would be, I'm looking to put my business in this building, do I have any zoning problems or anything like that, or I'm looking for some space, do you know any space that's available, or one of your inspectors just told me that I can't do this, and I don't understand why I can't do this. And so it's those types of, there's a little more immediacy when they call me. I think the purpose when this first went on your agenda was if a business had something that they thought you as a commission should start looking at, like we think this part of the zoning is out of whack for our businesses, as the Economic Development Commission, could you start talking about that? That's kind of, and so that's something that would take a little bit longer time. Again, we've never had a business. The Chamber's promoted it, on and off. We've done press releases about it. We've had it on Facebook at different times. We've tried everything we can think of to get it out there. Typically, what we find from the business community is they're going to come to the Economic Development Commission or the Planning Commission when there's an item on the agenda that may have some effect on their business. So hence the liquor store owners came when we reviewed the liquor ordinance last year. Other than that, we don't really see where they have that desire to come. In many cases, quite frankly, they would come to the council meeting during citizens' comments and voice something at that point. And that's probably a quicker option because they meet twice a month.
Commissioner Turner, sorry.
Skip, how does you had mentioned the panel that we had in March, and you said that fits in with the work plan. Is there a specific item, or is that part of something else?
When we ask you to look at the comp plan review, a lot of that information, if you recall, they said you should look at some of the things you've done in the heart of the city, you should be looking at some of these items in the MRQ, and we'll certainly incorporate them in our backgrounds to you at that time. These are some things that development panel suggested that you might want to address.
Right, I recall the discussion of evaluating other incentives that other communities might have versus what we have. That all fits into the comp plan review.
Those will all be
Okay.
part of the review.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner John?
As far as the Open to Business Forum, since nobody has showed up for the past 4 years, does it make sense not to just get rid of it? Does anybody see a reason to keep it? Then I would make a motion to remove that one.
Do you want to,
Do we need a motion on the whole thing, or this is just a discussion?
We will need a motion on your draft work plan, whether or not you're recommending council's adoption. But your discussion should center around, is there anything else you want to add to the work plan? Or if either one of the items that has been on your work plan repetitively, that staff is recommending you remove, if you desire to have one or both of those stay, that could be part of your discussion too. And if you decide to have one or both of those stay, that's what would be carried forth to the council.
Okay, I think we're in agreement that the open to business forum doesn't need to be there.
I was just going to bring up the attendance item as well, so if both of them.
The commission involvement, I assume on the ribbon cuttings, we would still be notified that they're happening, and if we choose to attend,
Absolutely.
okay. Then I don't see a need for it on the work plan either, unless someone has. Do we need to select 2 commissioners for BECREC before we approve the work plan?
Whatever's
part
your
of-
preference,
okay.
Mr. Chair.
Do we have 2 volunteers, or 2 or more, I guess?
I'd be happy to do it again.
Okay, Commissioner John, Commissioner Coppin?
Okay, which actually were the same 2 we had last year, so
Okay.
it'll be a repeat. They know the drill.
Yeah.
Now, you should have a motion.
Now we're looking for a motion
recommend.
to approve the review of the work plan draft.
The motion would be to recommend council approve.
Council, okay. Anybody want to make that motion?
I will make a motion that we recommend to council to adopt our work plan as stated by staff, removing of the commission involvement in the open business forum.
Second.
Motion made by Commissioner John, second by Commissioner Cherner. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also, as part of your work plan, there is one initiative that comes under the umbrella of the Economic Development Commission, and that is our STEM initiative. Again, similar to your work plan, what I'd like to do is give you a quick review of last year's STEM plan and what was accomplished, and then staff does have some suggested items as a draft for this year. Last year, we did attract 10 new STEM-based companies, and we had 2 of our existing companies expand. We continue to do an ongoing marketing effort at conferences, through newsletters, on our websites and everything else. We have in each quarter's Burnsville Bulletin, we have a little, what we call the Business Corner, where we promote not only STEM activities, but business activities in general. We do have an e-newsletter called The Microscope that goes out specifically to folks that have an interest in the STEM initiative, and we have a little over 200 recipients of that. And then we have a second e-newsletter that goes out to our broker community to talk about, various items in the city that will be of interest to the brokers, and we have about 325 recipients of that newsletter. We did engage in a partnership with the Chamber of Commerce and the school district in an event called a Business Leaders Educators Partnership. And what that was in October, about 35 of our business people went and spent a morning in one of our schools with either a principal or a vice principal, and kind of got an inside look at what goes on a typical day in a school. And then in November, we had close to 100 teachers that went to many of the same businesses, but about 30, 35 of our businesses, and spent a few hours kind of learning what happens in a business day in different types of businesses. And then in November, there was like a wrap-up luncheon. And this is kind of a kickoff that the school district is hoping will create more of a relationship between themselves and some of our businesses that will engage in some long-term activities, helping them plan curriculums and everything else. Staff was also, there's an initiative that started up last year called Burnsville Promise, which you'll hear a lot more about during this year. Staff is represented on the steering committee. Basically, the tenet behind Burnsville Promise is to make efforts so that every student in the Burnsville School District graduates from high school and attends some sort of post-secondary education to basically make them workforce ready. And there will be, you'll start hearing a lot more of that this year. The Business Leader Education Partnership was somewhat of a kickoff to that, because that started to get the collaboration between businesses and schools, because they're going to literally ask business people to help them plan curriculums for, if you think you want to be an engineer, here's some classes and some curriculum you should take in high school. If you think you want to go in the healthcare profession, here's some pathways for that. And there will be basically 4 pathways that our students could go through and be totally prepared to go into either a 2-year or a 4-year institution afterwards to get eventual learning. And so we have participated this past year on all of those. Our staff's proposal for a possible STEM work plan for next year would be a target of attracting 7 new firms, an expansion of 2 of our existing firms, promotion of another new initiative that is coming from the Dakota Scott Workforce Investment Board called Employers of Excellence. This actually, you'll see in about 3 weeks, you'll begin to see the press releases on this. This is a program where a business will be able to fill out an online survey that will ask them a number of questions about what they pay, their benefits program, all types of questions about their business. And if they participate in the survey, then when the survey is all completed, it will literally be crunched via computer, and it will generate a whole bunch of information, and we'll probably have about 3 categories of business, 50 employees or less, 51 to maybe 200, and then, in excess of 200 or something like that. They will get a report that will say, okay, here's what you do, and here's what similar-sized businesses in Dakota and Scott County do and offer to their employees. So they can begin to gauge, am I ahead of the curve, am I behind the curve? And we will, in each of those categories, award what will be known as some employers of excellence, and they will get banners to put outside their businesses. And obviously, in their recruiting, they can say, we've been named an employer of excellence because of how we conduct our business. This is a program that has been done nationally, and we are adopting it in Dakota and Scott County. So we would propose that we get behind that program. It is looked at as both a retention and an attraction program for employees, which is becoming extremely important to businesses to be able to attract them. So that would be one new thing on the possible STEM work plan that we would say let's get behind. Again, continue the back rec event, promote the Burnsville Promise that we've talked about, and we have partnered with the Chamber on a number of workforce events. We would propose that we continue to do that via the STEM. One item that I should bring to your attention is the City Council is going to have their all-day retreat at the end of this month. Staff is at that retreat recommending that they consider actually removing the STEM initiative from their ends and outcomes and shifting to a new initiative that we would call workforce readiness. The idea behind this is, right now, if from an economic development standpoint, attraction and retention of employees is the most important thing businesses are looking at. If a business is looking to come into an area, one of the first questions they ask now is, will there be an employee base for my business? If a business is looking at staying or leaving, one of the things they consider is, do I have an employee base? And if I leave a certain area, will I have my employee base elsewhere? So the effort has really shifted from, it used to be years ago, incentives and things like that. It's now really shifted to, can I have employees in wherever I'm locating in my business? If you look at our almost 2,500 businesses, they're very diverse, which means we need a diverse employee base also. So that's why staff is recommending at the council retreat that they consider making this shift. What staff would recommend to the commission is that you adopt the proposed STEM work plan, and then if council decides to continue with the STEM initiative, we have our work plan in place. If they decide to shift and go to initiative more towards the workforce readiness, the STEM work plan obviously will no longer be enforced. Many of the items that are on the STEM work plan relate to workforce readiness also, so we will still continue to do those types of initiatives. At this point, Mr. Chair, I would certainly take questions.
Discussion on any of those things? I think it sounds really good.
I just have a question. What else falls under ends and outcomes currently? I'm just curious. I'm not just familiar entirely
I'm
with that,
sorry,
with that
Commissioner.
category. And
We have different categories. For example, we have a development, redevelopment category, we have a public safety category, we have a administrative category, we have
Transportation.
Parks and Natural Resources category. And in each of those categories, the council has adopted, in your terminology, it would almost be like goals.
right.
So these are our goals. This is what we're gonna work on. And everything we do is based on these ends and outcomes, our goals. And we focus on those types of things. One of their ends and outcomes is to have an initiative focused on businesses that have a STEM base to them. And we put that initiative in about 6 or 7 years ago, and that initiative morphed from a prior initiative that was focused on the attraction of medical businesses. So we've kind of been going through a morphing process over the years. So the recommendation would be we'd morph into more of a focus on workforce readiness efforts, which are broad-based across our completely diverse business categories here in town. And I apologize for using a piece of terminology that,
No, that's
Those big words.
certainly workforce readiness. Certainly sounds better than ends and outcomes. So that's.
Yeah.
I certainly appreciate the desire to have a more defined focus on this particular issue. So it certainly makes sense to me.
Any questions, discussion? Do we need to, a motion to approve?
Yes.
Or recommendation on this one as well?
no, this one, the STEM initiative comes under your umbrella. You actually approve this work plan.
Okay. Any discussion or a motion?
I'll make a motion for the EDC to adopt the STEM work plan as drafted.
Motion by Commissioner Turner,
A second.
second by Commissioner Koppen. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries. And you're up for the next one, I assume?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had actually planned on doing this recap for you at your November meeting, but obviously, this was the only thing that was going to be on your agenda, which is why we canceled the November meeting. The numbers that I am going to give you are numbers through the third quarter of last year. I will not have year-end numbers until about the beginning of February. There's always a lag time in there. Through 3 quarters of last year, our Open to Business program had 40 new clients, which actually is 22% of the new clients in Dakota County. For 2 years in a row, the city of Burnsville has had the most amount of new clients in the program. There was $45,000 worth of direct loans from the Open to Business program to local businesses. That comprised about 24% of all loans through the Open to Business program. That does not count in any loans that they assisted a business in getting from the business's bank. Those are not counted in here. There was one new business attraction through the efforts of the Open to Business program, and that was actually 25%. There were 4 new business attractions in the county through 3 quarters of last year. The program has obviously done very well for us, and it has gained a lot of acceptance. It is in the budget again for 2016 to continue that program as it's in the other cities in Dakota County, so the program will remain as is in Dakota County. The nice thing is the Dakota County CDA covers half of the cost of the program, and then the 10 cities split the other half. So the cost of basically having a full-time consultant available to our businesses is actually $7,500 a year. It's probably the least expensive tool we have that we could give out to our businesses. And if there's any questions about the program, Mr. Chair, I would certainly answer them now.
Any questions on? I think we've been, or most of us have been through it before, but
Thank you, Commissioners.
updates.
Oh, I do have updates, don't I? We provided in your packet the updates from September and October and from November and December, since we did not have a November meeting. I would just draw your attention to a couple of items. In the September-October update, we did back in September participate in a statewide event in which the state brought in some national site selectors, and they spent a few days going around and everything else. We were fortunate enough that we actually had them, the national site selector that was in the metro area actually went to one of our businesses. That was their business tour. We've actually hosted a couple of times in the past. We've hosted like a luncheon for the site selector and had discussions. So one of our businesses kind of got to, shine a little bit in front of a national site selector. The other thing that I would bring to your attention is last year, for the first time ever, we had a little booth at the MNCAR Expo. MNCAR is basically the association for all the commercial brokers. It's the first time we've been there. It was very, very successful. We had a lot of brokers come and visit us. It's very typical at this event to have some sort of a game. We had a little cornhole toss game that they came, and a number of our building owners gave us prizes for the game, and we were able to meet with a lot of brokers, give out a lot of information. It's on our plans again next year to do it. And then on the November-December update, two things I would bring to your attention is that we are currently actually partnering with Greater MSP. They are working on a program that if they can get it in place, will help us retain one of our current businesses. We do have a current business that is looking to do an expansion, and the business is actually, two of the owners of the business live in two different states, so there's some competition to possibly take the business to one of those two states, and Greater MSP is helping us and is working with the staff at the state, and we may be able to do some things that will keep them here. And then I would also bring your attention to on that report that Greater MSP late last fall began a retention attraction process for employees, and they've actually created a website called Make It MSP. And if you're thinking about moving to Minnesota, you can go to this website, and it basically answers all types of questions, and they've done it very nicely by actually interviewing people, saying, where do you like to go for restaurants? What do you like to do for movies? What do you like? And so you've got actual people talking about what they like about living in the metropolitan area of Minnesota. And then they are going to be holding various events that newer people can come to and meet other new folks who have come to, the metropolitan area, and hopefully create some friends and give them something to do and have more people to talk about. It's a very unique approach. As far as everyone knows, no one else has tried this type of approach to basically focus on, hey, if you're an employee, this is a good place to be. We got a lot of really good companies, and we've got a lot of really good things to do. Obviously, part of what they're doing is also focusing on the fact that we actually do not, hole up for 4 months during winter. We kind of go do things like skiing and all of that, and ice fishing. So those are the kinds of things they're trying to bring forth. Very unique program that they're doing, and they're obviously trying to address the fact that, businesses in the metropolitan area need more employees. If the commission has any questions about the two, activity reports, I would certainly answer those questions.
Skip the national site selectors. Did they give you a report, or what kind of information did you get from them?
Yes, typically, the last morning, we have like a panel where they do presentations, and there's 5 of them. One of them stays in the metro area, and then the other 4 go to the 4 corners of the state. And interestingly enough, one of the things they told us is, if you want to attract companies to Minnesota, you have to have a workforce for them. That was the number one thing they pounded home. The incentive piece seems to continue to drop down the ladder as to how important it is. And as one of the site selectors said, if incentives come into play, they usually come into play at the very end, and if there's 2 communities that pretty much grade out equal. And then it's like, somebody's got to give me something to break the tie. That's where the incentives come in. They're not coming out of the door right away saying, if I come to your city, how much money will you give me to build a building? They're coming and saying, do you have workforce? Do I have good transportation systems? If they need broadband, do you have the broadband capabilities? You know, it's becoming more of those types of questions, and things like incentives are really dropping down. Communities like Burnsville, obviously, we are very, very fortunate. With 35W, 35E, we've got a great transportation system, can get almost anywhere, quickly. So, we grade out relatively high on the types of things that they're looking for. We have a reasonably highly educated population in Burnsville, and we're obviously surrounded by communities that have a reasonably high educated population, so we can provide, the workforce. We also have the type of, new, in many cases, immigrant workforce that can do some of our retail positions that also are struggling for employees. So the types of things that they tell us they're looking for, we typically grade out relatively high on them. We are making the good strides, but we obviously have to continue to do it.
Commissioner John?
What are some things that we could do better, or where are our negatives?
Well, interestingly enough, I don't know if it's a negative or a positive, but we don't have enough open land to accommodate everybody that typically would want to be here. We don't have, if you're looking to go into an existing warehouse building, nowadays, everybody's looking for 28 or higher ceilings. We have very few buildings at 28 or higher. Most of ours are capping out at 14. So that's where our aging industrial comes into play. We don't have that newer, higher building to accommodate the warehousing and and some of the newer manufacturing. And unfortunately, we don't have 8 vacant acres of land that they could build a new building on. Now, the flip of that is, fortunately, all of our land has got buildings on it and businesses on it, so it's kind of one of that catch-22. Mm-hmm. But and we even see it with expansion of businesses. I mean, there are businesses that, Abdallah was in the paper all last year. I mean, we did not have a place for their expansion to occur, so they're expanding in Apple Valley, and fortunately for us, they're keeping their facility here also. But that's one of the things locally that we struggle with, is just the availability.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners.
In review of the draft legislative agenda, Jenny Faulkner?
More riveting things to
Yes.
share with you, right? I'm here every year to give you an update on the council's legislative positions that are related to economic development. Their positions, statements are much more comprehensive than this, but we focus it down on the economic development related items. In that regard, the items they'll be presenting today have not changed from last year. They're the same thing, so I will kind of go through them quickly. I think I'll go through them kind of page by page too. We got 3 different types of positions. So the first one are priorities. These are items where the council is active, and they've directed staff to be active, working with our legislators to seek change. So the first one is the closure of Freeway landfill, and the city certainly supports the MPCA's efforts to close that in a way that's environmentally sustainable, and that could also provide for future economic development. Once the landfill is cleaned up, there hopefully will be some land available for some type of redevelopment at some point in the future. As of today, discussions are still continuing on that, as far as I know. The other one that's a priority economic development related gets to preservation of the host community economic development program. This is a grant program that we sought special legislation for, I want to say about 3 or 4 years ago now. And what it does is it helps abate economic impacts to communities that have landfills. We have 1 active landfill, 2 closed landfills. No one wants to build their building next to a landfill. There's a lot of impacts to our roads, and so it's not a pleasurable place to have a business and to attract businesses. So the grant program was established to provide economic development funds to communities that have MSW, which is sanitary waste landfills, not the demolition landfills. But anyways, there's 2 cities that can apply for these, Burnsville and Inver Grove Heights, and so we have had those funds 3 years in a row now. We are looking to have some minor changes to that legislation done as we've been through this for a couple of years. That grant application program, we're seeing that it's not shaping up in certain ways that what we intended when we sought this legislation to use this funds. They're limited, there's specific job requirements, and so we'd like to work to get that changed so that we have a little bit more flexibility to use those funds. Skip, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that. Skip's kind of taken the lead on that.
We've had great success. The Heart of the City deck expansion we did a couple years ago, we used this grant funding towards that. We currently have a grant for $346,000 that we'll put towards some road improvements on Cliff DuPont and 126 down in the MRQ. So it's been very, very beneficial, but as Ms. Faulkner has stated, there are specifically one of the requirements we struggle with is they ask that you have an immediate development that whatever you're doing will link to, and that you can prove that you have jobs. And we have been looking at using it basically kind of as the table setter, and that, you know, we're going to do different structural improvements in the MRQ, and then the business is going to come. So that is one of the things that we're going to try and get changed into legislation. And obviously, the state likes to have jobs, relate jobs to incentives they give out, so we're proposing that they count construction jobs as part of that, which they actually do on a number of other projects they deal with. So we're hoping, if we get it changed, it'll make it a lot more flexible for us to work on some projects.
Mr. Chair, before I go on to the next slide, I'd like to ask if the commissioners have any questions on either of these 2.
Commissioner John?
Are you talking about the soil remediation with the money of setting up the land?
We would not be utilizing that grant for soil remediation.
Oh, okay.
It basically has to be utilized by a public entity on public types, so roadways and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
We can't use the grant to do something for a private piece of property.
Oh.
And we own no land in the MRQ that has soil issues on it.
I see.
Okay. The next category on the legislative agenda relates to supporting position statements. These are the council's positions on items where we would send a letter of support. So if another city or League of Minnesota Cities is working on some legislation, one of our legislators is working on something, then the council would send a letter of support, or maybe not, if there's something that they specifically oppose. The big one here is related to development, redevelopment, and in your background, I gave you the whole paragraph, but I'm going to try to summarize here. The city certainly supports TIF flexibility, that we not be shoehorned or forced with any more restrictions than what we already have. TIF is very rigid tool and not used for a lot of projects, as you're well aware. The city opposes the diversion of state or Met Council economic development funds. Let's keep any funds that are dedicated for that purpose in those pools. We support innovative programs. We call it This Old Shop. There used to be a tax credit program called This Old House, which was geared towards individuals who made certain improvements to the older housing stock. We're working with our several other cities on implementing This Old Shop, which would be to give some tax credits to businesses with buildings 30 years or older who make reinvestments to them. Or perhaps something even more innovative like an income tax credit. A lot of our competitive states and regions and some cities collect individual income taxes. We do not in the state of Minnesota, but if the state would take it on to refund when jobs are brought here from out of state, that's another tool that could be used to refund to the company income tax credits. And certainly, we support extension of TIF districts that were created during the recession. We're personally still experiencing some challenges with that. In the MRQ, we got some special legislation in 2008 that did help us deal with the soil corrections, Commissioner Johns, and we haven't built a single building out there yet. We're still working on the dirt work, and the time is ticking on this TIF district. So we are seeking some special legislation that would give us some extensions that would allow time for more soils work to be done before kind of the clock starts on when we start getting increment. Well, there's going to be no additional tax base or increment generated if there's no buildings, right? So that's one of the changes that we're asking for. A couple other minor housekeeping ones, but that's going to be the most critical. So are there any questions on this particular supporting position?
Other than the last one, the support of the extension of the TIF district, are some of the others up for discussion? Are they an active piece of legislation right now, or is it just an ongoing support?
That's a good question, Chair Reavers. It just kind of depends. We're working with, I think is it LMC, Skip, or Metro LMC on this old shop? Skip sits on a committee that's working on that. So if we can get some sponsorship through our lobbying associations, then certainly something could be proposed on that. Or if another city steps up, if they're having some issue with some TIF and they want flexibility, that would be to the benefit of us. Yeah. Stuff always comes up in the middle of sessions, and so it's good to have these positions kind of laid out ahead of time. We know where the council's at. And that rolls right into the very next one, local land use controls. It seems every session something comes up that affects the city's authority to do certain zoning. A law comes up or is proposed that would tell the city what we have to do in certain zoning districts, or would tell us what we can't regulate. And so our council is very adamant that we have local control, that's decided here in this room by the city council. They get to decide kind of what goes where and how it operates. So that's what that's all about. We oppose laws that limit the city's authority. And that authority, the zoning authority, is really kind of what this is talking about. We implement our comprehensive plan through the zoning ordinance, and so that could impede our ability to do that. On the taxation piece, we are opposed to restrictions on levy limits. That seems to be talked about almost every year, and so we are opposed to that. Transportation, we certainly support additional funding. It seems like there's never enough money for all the projects that are out there, especially getting to funding existing operations, not even talking about expansion of our transportation system, but let's just talk about funding to maintain the roads that we have. So we certainly would support that. And getting to broadband, I think you've talked a little bit about that here over the years. The city supports statewide mapping of all the broadband across the state. It seems to kind of be sporadic what information is where, because everyone's kind of doing their own thing. We support funding the Office of Broadband. That was started, 2 years ago, I think? And then eliminating local barriers to broadband. So that's something that our council is supportive of, and I will stand for questions on these statements if there are any.
Is the city on an island on any of these, positions?
I don't think so.
It's
No.
pretty,
I think most cities would be on board with this. Good question. That's a good question. And then these last ones are just kind of ones that are being monitored, nothing active. We'd have no position statements, or we wouldn't send a letter of support unless something drastic happened, but in regards to state property tax. And then on transportation, a couple things there related to property maintenance, just tracking if there's any changes in laws related to MnDOT's responsibility to maintain the right-of-way that they have. It seems every year we get complaints about weeds on Highway 13. They need to be mowed, and MnDOT, they mow them once or twice a year, and so, again, street improvement districts, that is a additional funding option of kind of special assessments that can be done to improve streets. And that's what the city doesn't use that, but that's a tool that other cities could use. So we just are monitoring that. And the whole entire city's legislative agenda. I can send that to you if you're interested in that. It's several pages long, covers everything from public safety to these economic development things. I think we even have something on there in daycares, but our council met with our legislators back in December. They certainly seem supportive of all the council's positions, and were willing to even sponsor a couple of bills that the council was considering. So if you have any suggestions or changes, I certainly am happy to, will pass those along to the city council.
Commissioner John?
Just curious, do we have lobbying efforts on these issues at all, or is it just?
Commissioner John, it depends on what it is. So on like the host community grant, we do. We have a lobbyist that we've hired for that. We are members of League of Minnesota Cities. They are a statewide lobbying organization on behalf of cities. So how they are set up is they have multiple committees, different committees for local government operations, finance. There's one for community development. Skip and I sit on various parts of that. And so that's members from various cities who are members and want to participate. We sit in a room over the summer and talk about what policies the league should go to bat for us as a group. So there are lots of other, we do share a lot of the same viewpoints as many of our other cities. Some are a little different when you get out to the rural areas. They're more concerned about different things than we are. A lot of railroad issues came up last summer. And the Metro Cities is a lobbying group that we are also a member of. That's just the metro-wide cities. So there's a lot more, same thing, they've got a handful of committees that we sit on. A lot more interested in what the Met Council does, so that kind of comes up in that lobbying group.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I think we have a motion for adjournment, or we need a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Commissioner Turner, second by Commissioner John, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners.